It begins with master, but doesn't end like you think it is. Hey, everybody. Oh, hey, we're live. What do you know?
We were just talking about A Dream of Genie.
That's right.
Oh,
Yes,
master.
man. Oh, don't get me started on that. Now you're bringing back memories that I shouldn't have while on YouTube. How you doing, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Spoiler Room. It's our penultimate episode, Over the Hill episode. It's our second last episode where we're looking at films from 1975 because they turned 50 just like I did this year. And this one fitting in with our rock and world theme. And boy, howdy. This is going to be an interesting conversation, I'm sure. So we're talking about 1975's Tommy. So thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up the chair and popping your favorite drink with us as we talk movie spoilers. And I have a wonderful crew sitting down with me tonight in the spoiler room to talk about getting feel me, touch me, see me, and who knows if they'll heal me or not. We don't know, but in any case, they are here. First off, he's back with us from the Establishing Shot. It's always a pleasure to have the one and only Mr. Jeff York here. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, great to be here with you, gentlemen. It's going to be a fun show, I think.
I think it'll be a great show. And here's the guy who, as I say, keeps coming back for more, though I think when we get certain movies, he really starts scratching his head. But none other than my right-hand man, Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great.
And so we're doing Tommy. 1975, The Who. Big cult following of this film. Much like what we watched last week with Pink Floyd's The Wall, but a bit drastic differences. And I dare say I have different feelings about this one than I did with The Wall. But first, let's get a little synopsis. And since he hasn't been here for a while and he does them so well, Jeff, would you like to try to give the synopsis of Tommy?
I will, and I'm going to start with the fact that it, first of all, came from a concept album. Back in the day when they did those often, in 1969, The Who did a concept album that was basically a story of this young kid who was sort of damaged by seeing his mother having an affair with a man who wasn't his father. He was a man shipped off to war. They thought he died over there, and indeed the film does start with that war. The man was not killed in the war. He comes home and finds the wife has moved on, and it becomes this big fracas. How do you find it? Fracas, yes. And the soldier ends up getting killed, and then the mom and her lover try to tell Tommy, the little boy who's the child of the dad who was just killed, that you didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, you didn't experience it. And it becomes sort of this metaphor for a lot of, sort of the world telling children not to see and experience and go through things that they had and all those kind of stuff. And he grows up sort of as a troubled child. The mother marries this man she was having a relationship with, and he ultimately becomes sort of this savant, but he's a savant who is perceptive of the world around him, even though he sort of turned off all of his senses. When he becomes a great player of the game of pinball, and he then is turned into sort of a great sports champion, and from there it escalates into celebrity and even a sort of religious sort of figure that people worship and follow. And it's all a metaphor, I think, in many respects about celebrity and sort of the problems with parenting of teenagers and sort of the worlds of difference between the post-war generation and the sort of rebellious 50s and 60s kind of children that came out of that as they move into the 70s. And it's directed by Ken Russell, who is known as not only doing musical biographies then, but also being kind of a crazy out there auteur. And he certainly turns this into a Hell's a Poppin' kind of film. The album, which I heard when I listened to it with my cousins back when I was, I think, 12, was a much more moody piece. At least I remember hearing it, thinking it was kind of moody. I mean, it had rock songs and everything else, but it was kind of a moody piece because, like, Tommy, can you hear me? The mom sings to him. It's very sad and poignant. There's still some poignancy in the film, but it's a little bit over the top in most respects. So it's kind of done as this big sort of rock opera, which it becomes. and sort of a gonzo production. Ian, it's funny, we've talked about some of these things before, and I'll obviously share this with you too, Mark, being there on the panel, but this and Richard Lester's A Hard Day's Night, I think in some respects almost gave us a template of what MTV was to become. Because watching this, which I had not watched since I saw it in the theaters in 75, yes, when I was in junior high. That's the great thing about inviting me onto these panels, both of you, with your wonderful shows that you let me guest on, is that, I wonder what it was like when that was in the theater. Wait a minute, we've got old man Jeff York here. Let's hear it. But it was this like sort of astounding, eye-popping kind of spectacle. And then, I was watching this for the first time since 75, so it was kind of a treat, but I was sort of reminded of like, oh my goodness, this almost feels like, MTV videos where there's very little dialogue, there's very little sound effects. It's mostly just the score and, all this action and energy, and it's quick cuts, and, they're jumping all over the place, and sometimes they're here, sometimes they're there, and it doesn't necessarily fit in the same scene. It reminded me of how, the kind of template for a 4 or 5 minute music video was. So, just the last thing I'll just share about the context after the sort of the basics of the plot is, it's written by The Who, of course. Peter Townsend mostly wrote it, and Tommy is played by Roger Daltrey. All the Who appear in it, but Daltrey was the lead role, at least when Tommy became a teenager and an adult after that. But it's sort of lasted, and it continues to get done at concerts, and they've done a Broadway show of it that did very well in the 90s, and they revived it. And, it's kind of this concept album that turned into all these sort of things that have sort of lasted. And I think, this movie isn't quite as remembered as the album and some of these other things, the show coming back a few times on Broadway. But it was fun to revisit this because it was kind of a big deal in 75 when it came out, and it continues to be part of, I think, the legacy of this concept of this poor kid who's sort of struggling to fit into the world that's changing around him and very different than his parents' generation. And I think it's a comment on sort of all that mid-century stuff that everybody was going through, especially in rock. Music and changing away from the music hall things, especially in England, where this takes place. But it's a fascinating sort of precursor to MTV, as well as a fascinating, edgy relic from the 70s.
Bravo.
Well, thank you. I hope that was not too long.
You put that well. And maybe I would have seen it differently in 75. But first, Ian, I know you shared some comments watching Tommy. Now that credits rolled and you are here, sir, what are your high-level feelings with Tommy?
It's weird because in a lot of ways I feel like we've just rewound back to our discussion of The Wall from last week.
Mm-hmm.
Another film very similar. My dad was fixated on this movie and he tried to share it with me, and I never watched the entire thing because I think I fell asleep. But I mean, you can't show The Wall or Tommy to like a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
It just is not going to work.
Yeah.
But it does have this weird triple dent gum moment where there's that one scene with Tommy's mom and Uncle Frank when they keep that refrain is like, do you think it's all right? For whatever reason, that little tune has been in my head for like 40 years. Now that I've seen it and I've got the full context, this is the first and only time I've watched it all the way through. Tommy is a movie that I appreciate. I think sort of on the level that Jeff you're talking about, but I think it's a terrible film. Everything is just like overblown. There's no moments of like subtlety or reflection or quiet. Everything is kind of like yelled and exclaimed, and it's big and it's bright and it's in your face. And it's like other movies would kind of do the Tommy thing, but find different ways to channel that energy. I'm thinking of the Blues Brothers. I mean, you can't watch Aretha Franklin's performance in that and not think of Tina Turner's performance here. The Elton John kind of cameo is wild with the big boots. That's very much something that was like happening the next tent over in Terry Gilliam's Circus from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, right? So I think it's a very influential film. And I almost wish that it had just been cut up into a series of like 25 5-minute music videos or something like that, because being forced, and I'll say forced to watch an hour and 40 minutes of whatever this is, like it was really hard. I felt a lot like the frequent cuts to Roger Daltrey's face, and he's just kind of like zoned out, like for long stretches at a time while stuff is going on around him. That was me. I was in hell watching this movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And we lost a viewer. Thank you, Ian. No, just kidding.
I'm here to work my magic, folks. I don't know what to tell you.
I'm one of those two where after watching it, and after our discussion of Pink Floyd's The Wall last week, so many similarities between that approach to that film and this one, but I dare say The Wall had a little bit more of a coherent story than this one, and that's not saying a whole lot, but yeah, this one definitely, it's another, and it's why I wanted to kind of do this month of rock and world and revisit specifically rock musicals done by like a single band or whatnot, because it's definitely different than watching a musical, you know, which we're gonna have when we watch Rock of Ages. That's not one band doing it. That's a genre of type of music that will end up being a part of that musical. But watching, you know, just a band specifically focus on their music, it's very it's very interesting to see their approach and how they tell their narrative, because you can tell they're music guys, right? You can definitely tell they're music guys because your scenes are kinetic, chaotic, and they jump around, and you don't really have a huge amount of structure to your scenes. I mean, there's a concept to the scene, but I wouldn't say a whole lot of structure to that would lead you to the next scene. All of it's contained. It's like you said, Ian, and I think Jeff, you mentioned it, precursor to MTV. It is like a string of music videos they did for one album that they've pieced together. So they do have a common theme, common characters, but at the end of the day, each one of these is their own little like bubble. And, you know, the problem is some of the concepts, and especially with the Tommy character and his journey, you need a little bit more than that, because otherwise, especially when you get into the last like third or, you know, quarter of this film, you're scratching your head. I was scratching my head. I mean, I know the metaphors and I know what they were going for, but at the same time, the abruptness of the changes of especially characters or whatnot, there's no lead up, there's no hint of what, I mean, you know, and we're going to jump around, folks. At the end, Tommy, who now has heard and see and feel and touch and can do all these things and has become this kind of happy messiah, ascending celebrityism and almost you know, worship. And he calls everybody to the happy camp, which is where he went to as a kid, but now it's Tommy's happy camp. So you got everybody playing pinball and they're like, yeah, Tommy. And then one guy just goes, nah, fuck it. Boom. And you're just like, where'd that come from? You know, there's nothing hinting that people are turning away from Tommy led up to that. It's just like suddenly, oh, we're turning on you. And maybe that's their message. But at the same time, there's a number of other points where there's such a character 90 degree to the point where it's jarring till you're like, what?
Right. You know, to that point, Mark, and Jeff, maybe you can speak to this, because you have, even though 50 years have passed, you've had the benefit of seeing this twice. But I honestly was so, as I mentioned, and I take this on, I admit this, about kind of zoning out during large stretches of this movie. At the end, to this point Mark is mentioning, I'm just read the Wikipedia synopsis about what happens at the end of this film. The converts, those are the kind of the cult followers, confused about Tommy's odd practices and his family's commercial exploitation of the compound, wrathfully demand that Tommy teach them something useful. Tommy does so, artificially deafening, muting, and blinding everyone, only to inadvertently provoke a riot. And that's when they kill, you know, Nora and Frank, right, and destroy the camp. Okay. There's the whole bit where they get these, you know, ball gags and things put in their eyes and all that stuff. And that seems, you know, they volunteer for that. But I miss the part about they were looking for something more in his message, and what exactly it was that turned them against him and started that riot on top of that like mound of stuff. Is there something missing from that, or was it an interpretation that I missed? Because it, to Mark's point, it did seem to kind of come out of nowhere. It's building to one thing. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool, but then it turns into this other thing. I'm like, I'm totally lost. And I'm also kind of mad that they're destroying these beautiful.
Oh
pinball
my God.
machines.
Yeah. The destruction of the pinballs. I nearly cried. That's what was going to get the emotional movement out of me, because I love pinballs so much. And I'm watching these classic, wonderful pinballs. And I'm like sitting there going, man, I want to be on set and play
I hope
these.
that was one take and they didn't have like double machines that they destroyed, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Are these, because I will not fault Tommy for being a cheap or unimaginative looking movie. There's some
No.
amazing things
Yeah.
going on here. So I'm hoping that some of that budget was to make fake pinball machines that looked real enough that they could destroy them, and not like, oh, we got a bunch of these old machines no one cares about. Let's just take a sledgehammer to them. But back to my point, I guess I'm asking you this question, Jeff. Is there actual connective tissue that Mark and I are missing that's in the movie and not just kind of a post hoc, we can write about this and put it on Wikipedia and say that it's actually there when it's not?
I think in some respects, the original intent of this material was to be sort of an indictment of the parents' generation and all institutions, be they religion or business or, even commercials. I mean,
Sure.
but it all gets sort of painted with the same broad brush. And then even at the end, well, once Tommy becomes part of it, he's a problem, and the audience is fickle and they can't deal with anything, and they're awful as well. So it's just a vicious cycle. And I think that's a little too easy. It might not have been as easy a sort of a stance in 75, but it feels like it today, because I think one of the problems that you're also illuminating, gentlemen, in this film is it all feels like it's pitched at an 11. And when I heard the original concept album, there's quiet in there. And, Tommy is this quiet character. He's in his own head, and he's, unsure of where he stands. And even his experience of stuff when, the pinball wizard is singing about, he's got such a supple wrist and he does it all in his thing. Where is that? We don't see that. All we see is the noise and the drama. And grant you, we're the audience watching all this, but there could have been some quiet and some calmer scenes in this. It's all so big. Like by the time Anne Margaret is, rolling around in suds and then beans and then chocolate, it's like, well, every other scene has been over the top. So that doesn't seem that over the top. And yet that's supposed to be, her sort of in the excess of commercialism that she's turned her son into, as they had, the sort of royal family, if you will, selling cans of beans on television. I get that. I think that sort of metaphor works, but everything is a metaphor, and everything is at an 11. I think the ending is just like, oh, all religion is bad, and the audience is, fickle, and they're looking for some answers, and the answers are in themselves. It's just like the same message at the end of Life of Brian. Look to yourselves. Look to yourselves. No, don't listen to me. No, don't listen to me. And they're just dinglings. Sort of the same easy choice here that, the masses are unwashed and stupid. The funny thing is, I think there are moments in here where if they had dialed back some of the metaphor, I think they would have had a better thing. Like I forgot about this completely, but I love the idea that, and this is in 75, before it was, sort of, we knew so much about celebrity worship and how we've come to become a Kim Kardashian society who gets much more ink than, a Nobel Prize winner. But the Marilyn Monroe Church, I thought, was a very, very kind of clever conceit, albeit the scene goes on a few minutes too long. But I also love the cross with the pinball at the top of it, which was very interesting because it's a T, and then it turns into a cross, which is sort of their version of religion, which, you can say, is that Scientology or any of these other crazy est movements and things like that with cults and that kind of stuff? Perhaps, this is only a few years after Charles Manson. But I'll tell you one thing that maybe opens up a different part of the conversation for us as well. But this movie is sandwiched in between two far superior movies that I think did all the things that I was just complaining about properly. One was 1972's Cabaret, and the other was 1979's All That Jazz, both directed by Bob Fosse. But I think they work because they have ebb and flow. There's quiet. There's more of a clear understanding of what we're saying. The the writer, as Michael York plays in Cabaret, is wanting to write about Germany and what's going on in Europe, and he's there for the story, right? And then he gets involved personally with a woman who's at this club, which is under transformation and sort of reflecting the politics of and change, and at first editorializing it, and then sort of falling asunder to it. And then All That Jazz is about a man who wants to create a great show, and he creates a great movie, but it's all at the expense of showing his crazy life for what it is. But I think of the quiet moments in both those movies as much as the Joel Grey or the Ben Vereens and some of those kind of things. This movie needed something of that. Roger Daltrey's performance and time, they should have just had stuff where he's quiet, where he's like tuned out, and the soundtrack just stops for seconds. And Tommy, can you hear me? And then he just sees her mouthing the words. It needed things like that in there. But Ken Russell, I think, was too energized by this, and this is a rock opera, and we're going to go for broke, and it's big, and it's brassy, and I've got the Who, and they're on stage with Elton John, and it played as kind of fantastical back then, but I think in retrospect it all looks to be too much.
Well, you're reminding me, Jeff, of, and I bring this up way too often, but it's Joel Schumacher's attitude towards Batman.
Yeah.
His only conception of it in popular culture when he was making his two films seemed to have been the 1960s TV show.
Right.
And he would scream at his actors, on set. He admitted to this in the commentaries, I think, for Batman Forever, Batman Robin, one of them. Like, it's a comic book. Come on, people. It's a comic book. More color, more big. Not realizing that there's an entire history of, not only the original Batman comic, but the kind of the renaissance of the mid to late 80s of, Dark Knight and Dark Knight Returns and the Killing Joke and that stuff. Yep. And also what Tim Burton did, though Batman Returns were big, but they were also kind of dark and brooding and had elements of kind of like quiet and sinister and pathos, which he almost completely got rid of in his two films. That's the same thing that we're seeing here with Tommy. And it's so disappointing because at a certain point, it's when, and this is the spoiler room, I had no idea Jack Nicholson was in this movie.
Yeah, I didn't know Jack Nicholson wasn't in it and singing too. I'm like,
yes, when he starts singing, I'm like, why did he not have a career in musicals or singing? Because he's got a lovely voice, and his is the subtlest character in this movie. He kind of sings and performs his singing dialogue as a regular person dealing with all these crazies. And he really drew my attention to how sad a character Tommy is. And I think this movie needed to delve into that and really do something with that sadness and that tragedy and what would compel him to become this messianic figure, because ultimately, and I think this might be colored by my having watched The Wall last week, but it's another movie about a giant rock band, and they're all concerned because they're too afraid of their own power, and people are going to worship them. Like, oh no, the horror. I'm like, come on, guys.
Well, but it's also, dare I say, too, both movies are very sort of anti sort of British society in a way.
Yeah.
It's the your parents' generation that fought World War II and still believed in the crown and wanted the sort of family unit and all this kind of stuff.
Losers, basically, what you're saying,
Jeff. Yeah,
they're
exactly.
All losers.
They think they didn't get the Beatles. They didn't get the fashion. They didn't get
they're not hip
and stuff. They're not hip and cool. And how dare they? And these people. I mean, the funny thing is, in this movie too, is you've got Oliver Reed, who's generally a very subtle actor. I mean, if you've ever seen Oliver, it's funny. It was directed by his uncle, Carol Reed. And one of the smart things that Carol Reed did, because he wasn't a musical director at all. In fact, he had directed like The Third Man and mostly dramas in his life. But he came in not knowing musicals, but he said, well, the first thing we have to do is if Bill Sykes, the character that Reed played the villain in it, is going to be the villain, he can't have a song. Because as soon as he sings, it's ludicrous. Because, it's like, well, now he's not so scary because he's hitting those high E's, So he cut the Bill Sykes song, even though it's in the show.
No villain can hit it high E. No.
Right. But he's like, and then he just doesn't say anything through most of the movie, and he's menacing as hell, and he's always been kind of this brooding presence in all kinds of films. And here he's so over the top, like he's in the music hall, and I know that's what they were going for. Like when he's first introduced at the camp, and he's mugging and like, hey, whoa, like this kind of stuff. And there's that tone through the film, and it's satirizing how ludicrous kind of the music hall was in those days, especially compared to this new version of music that's much more cool and hip. But it's too easy of a target, I think, and it seems almost as bad as probably the same old fogies. You thought, those darn kids and their loud music. Well, the counter is, well, those old fogies and their old, vitriolas. I mean,
well, here's the thing, like,
I forget they were called. But anyway.
Oliver Reed was one of my favorite things in this movie.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is that the movie was not about him.
Right.
I mean, I think it would have been really interesting if it had been, keep the premise, the setup, but he accidentally or purposely kills the dead, the thought to be dead husband, and now he's got this wife that he's constantly trying to impress because he's kind of a joke, but he's got this big personality. He's like, hey, let's do all these get rich quick schemes.
Yeah.
But we've also got this son who doesn't respect me, and I may have led to his catatonic state. That's all very interesting, but the movie's focused on Tommy, and Uncle Frank becomes this background character, not exactly a foil. But every time Oliver Reed was on screen, I was like, he's doing something really interesting, and he's kind of making Anne Margaret's character interesting by comparison. That whole thing with the suds and the beans and the you call it pudding, I just thought it was shit. To me that was just a way of like, Anne Margaret's not really as interesting in this movie as everyone had hoped, so let's give her something outrageous that people will talk about. Whereas Oliver Reed, he's just magnetic in his sleeves from the moment we see him until the moment he's dead.
And we're gonna pull over real quick because we got Colonel Clegg back.
Hey,
how you doing, sir? And he said, Tommy, can you hear me? And
no, that's the
they
point.
also said the film's meant to be experienced well under the influence. Yeah, another film where you should probably be under the influence. You could create it. No, here's the thing: is we talk about this being a rock opera, which is what they intended, and everything's turned up to 11. There's another film that we looked at the beginning of the year, and I'm bringing it around. Yeah, pardon my little shill here. We looked at that wasn't rock opera. And it also had songs dialed up to 11 for the most part. And it had beats in there, though, because it actually had dialogue and some acting. And I'm talking about Rocky Horror Picture Show. If you look at Rocky Horror Picture Show, a lot of the music in that is ramped up. It's energetic. It's that. But they gave you quiet moments, and that's where the double-edged sword is. Don't get me wrong. I love, and I've mentioned it before, I love movies that either don't have dialogue and tell their story, or they do it in an interesting way, like a full musical like this, where the songs are back to back. But you need to have someone who knows how to handle that material, and not necessarily a rock band member or someone, who's done concerts in that. But
when you only have an album,
right,
and yet they're still quiet on the album. I mean, it's like the Moody Blues, Days of Future Past. That's a concept album too, and they're going through the weekend seasons, and but there's these moments of quiet, and there's moments where you calm, and then the music starts very slow and builds up, but still it's mostly driven by music. That's fine on a concept album, and the listening to the Tommy original concept album is quite a wonderful memory of mine with my cousins. But when you're doing a movie, you've got the visuals working in tandem with that. So now you've got two things that are big sensory stuff. And for a movie and story that's about a man who doesn't have that sensory stuff, to only have us have a sense of those senses and not share his lack of them, I think is a missed opportunity that I think betrays the material in a certain respect.
Well, yeah, especially when you get that scene where, I mean, I picked up on the metaphors and the meanings of what they were going through, but I was trying to just look at this as a film narrative and, how they were trying to tell this story. And there are a lot of issues is where I ran into, but you get that scene where there would have been a perfect opportunity for them to get creative. I mean, you're already going abstract and such, where you get this song about, Tommy, can you hear me? How will he be saved if he can't hear, touch, or see? How is he going to get religion if he doesn't have basically his senses? And they could have easily cut to his perspective where everybody's still singing, but you got absolutely quiet and nothing, and then you cut back to, or even go dark, have it cut to him, you zoom in on him or whatever, and you got nothing. and then you cut back to people singing it. I mean, something to maybe convey a little bit more what is going on with your character, and appreciating that arc more with him, and you get the symbolism and everything in here. You're right, though. Frank Hobbs really is putting in a performance. He reminded me a bit of what's his name from A Funny Thing Happened to Me on the Way to
Zero
the
Mostel?
Huh?
Zero Mostel?
Yeah, the lead in Funny Thing Happened to Me on the Way to the Forum, the movie. It reminded me a bit of his performance in there.
Because there's a selling of the hucksterism, which is
right.
Both the narrator of Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum,
Mm-hmm.
Who's telling the story, as well as the Uncle Frank character, and Reed's great in it. I mean, it's just, but it's big, and it keeps getting. The rest of the movie keeps getting big around them. There's nothing that's small here. By the way, one other thing I just wanted to say, and this is an interesting question for both of you. I was going to ask you about that, so I remember. I'm glad you triggered me to remember it. But the other thing that I think was interesting about this movie and the whole concept album as well, is this was all preceded by the 1971 concept album of Jesus Christ Superstar, written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. And that was not intended to be a Broadway musical or a London musical. It was a concept album where they had, the story being told through music. And, that movie had that album, and I think subsequently the plays and even the movie, which wasn't great, but had the same question. And that is, sort of given the lens of what we know about how religion is done today or celebrity is done today, how would Jesus have been regarded with a little bit more of that sort of modern take on it? And that's what the music did, and those questions were asked here. I mean, even Mary Magdalene's song, like "I Don't Know How to Love Him," was putting it out there that in a movie narrative or a musical narrative, whatever you want, that character being the only female would be the female love lead, and yet they at least respected it that she can't be, because of the way the story is told and the story of Jesus, et cetera, at least not at this time. But at the same time, I think this sort of Messiah obsession of young people trying to look for something to believe in, was so, because they weren't believing in the institutions anymore, and the government, and maybe war, and we dropped the bomb, and different things going on with wars, and that communism and fighting Vietnam, and who knows what maybe influences. But I think people were looking something to believe in, and certainly they turned to rock music, or they turned to celebrity, they turned to drugs, they turned to counter religions. And I think in some respects, all of these are sort of about, what do we follow? Who do we sort of put up on a pedestal as somebody who can help us through the day and night and influence us? And directly done in Jesus Christ Superstar. But to me, the one thing I thought also while I was watching this is that Tommy seems to be imitating that in the third act, which I don't think it needed. I think it would have been enough that he became a celebrity. And what do you do with that once they move on to the next shiny object? I love also, by the way, the metal balls that she's putting into the bombs in the beginning, and then those
those are pinballs. Yeah,
that's a lovely little connection, because it's sort of saying, look, it's all kind of the same, even though you generations don't think so, in its weird way. But I think that is evidenced here too, and so much of that stuff. I mean, even thinking, and I don't want to keep adding more examples, but the whole Charles Manson freak out, I think, was not only because the crimes are so violent, but he thought of himself as this sort of messianic figure too. And at times he would say things like, "I'm both Jesus and the devil," and it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, here's how some of the Opus Dei and some of those people may think of this, or the devil is the hitman for Jesus to cause the rapture. I mean, there's strains of weirdness like that, or Scientology was coming. Everybody's looking for an answer, but it seemed a little too easy as a crutch to put that into the third act, when I don't think they needed it.
Yeah, the third act surprised me with this film, because this was my first time watching it. I've only seen bits and pieces. Obviously, I knew of the songs, for the Who, the Touch Me, See Me, Feel Me. I also know, Touch It, Touch It, Touch Me, but that's a different movie. Anyway, Rocky Horror. But sorry, the touching. In my 80s mind, the touch lyrics from both songs connected together. Yes. Where I was going with this is, I thought it was going to lead to, and it surprised me, because when Tommy gets his senses back by his mom kicking him through the window, either metaphorically or physically, for sure, I looked at the runtime and go, oh shit, we got a third of the film yet to do when that happened. I didn't think that was going to happen till more towards the end. I thought we would have spent a little bit more time on his buildup of becoming a celebrity and his parents, the two parents exploiting him, still giving you your message of exploitation of celebrity or whatever. And then having it to where once he developed his senses, people would reject him. Then he would no longer become a sense, you would have the downfall of Tommy's celebrityism in the last, like, say 15 minutes or so, to where, oh, hey, I've got my senses. Well, now you're not special anymore, and have everybody move on. I think you could have done that. And I think it would have fit a little bit more with what they were going for than what they end up giving us, which is far more abrupt and more head scratching. Because when Ian was talking, there is a scene, the guy who smashes the pinball, there is a scene a little bit earlier that you barely notice because the song is ramped up to 11. Creepy sadistic cousin is playing the organ. There are that same guy, the Where's Waldo guy. They're looking at the product in front of the gate, and they reject their basket. They put it away and walk away. And so I thought they were done with it. I didn't think they would show up, but then he shows up again later with the pinball. I'm like, oh, okay, he's going along with it again. So that part, I was like, if he was rejecting it, that don't have him in here anymore. But I think that's where I was expecting it. So this ending really kind of messed it up, because everything, I was like, okay, let's see where you end. Let's see if you nail the ending, because we've all seen movies to where you're like, I'm not sure where this is going. I'm not sure how I feel like it. But then you get like a really solid ending, and you're just like, oh, this movie is this, you get it now because you took this journey. We take this journey, we get to the end, and like, Colonel Clegg said, I kind of wish I would have had some, some influences for watching this. I might, either not care or not think about it as hard. It's just that watching it, I'm like, I get your concepts. And that was what kind of frustrated me. I'm like, I get what you're saying, but how you're saying it isn't really that great.
Well, and that's what I, no offense to Colonel Clegg, but whenever I hear the phrase, oh, this movie was meant to be watched while you're stoned, or you need to turn off your brain, or any of these other things, I'm like, but that's not art. That's not a movie. There's things that you can, if you're watching something in an altered state, maybe you can tune into something or see something a bit differently, but it's not up to the filmmaker to say, I'm going to get away with something by just, marketing it as a trippy experience that, smoke a bowl, drink some booze and watch my movie and you'll get it, man. No, you should be able to appreciate this in a state of utter sobriety and have something that might even, the film could cause some kind of a hallucinogenic state, like the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, or Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, which there is a narrative turn in that movie that I swear to God, I had an out-of-body experience in the theater the first time I saw it, when you realize what the movie is actually about.
Yeah.
But as far as, I'm just confused, like, am I supposed to be on drugs because I'm going to appreciate the subtleties of this movie? Or is it, if I do enough drugs or if I'm not sober, then I'll gloss over the fact that the whole thing is a mess? Because I think what you're saying is kind of interesting, Mark. Like, there is that whole idea of, once they open up Tommyland, you do have people coming in and buying the magazines, buying the albums, buying the gear to like make themselves artificially deaf, dumb, and blind. And they show up and one guy hands over $1 to the cashier and the guy goes, it's $3. And then you got people kind of grousing and they pull out more money. So it's like, it's just like the money changers in the temple, which coincidentally enough was the gospel in mass today. But it's like, okay, where's the connection point in there? Because that seems to be Frank and Nora's, exploiting their son even further. Is Tommy aware of this? What does he think about it? There should be some confrontation, or if he's in on the grift. But no, it's just, there's no landing this plane, even though the beginning of the movie begins with a crashing plane. Maybe that should have been our warning.
Well, it's interesting too, because the original concept album has the third act, if you will, where Tommy is a celebrity and he is worshipped by people, and it almost has them sort of treating him like he is sort of this messianic figure and stuff. But then they start to turn off to that, mostly because I think, if I recall, it's because they move on to the next thing, which is sort of how
Sure.
pop culture works, celebrity, whatever you want to call, even to some degree, sometimes fads in who we put on pedestals, be they religious sorts of people or not. But here again, because you have the visuals as well as the soundtrack so much, it's too much. It is almost it's funny. You almost want to become Tommy while you're watching some of this, where you can sort of tune out some of this stuff because it's all coming at you at such a decibel and such a frenetic level. A lot of it is admirable. I mean, it was pushing the boundaries of editing and storytelling and some things like that here. But I also think it's interesting that there's so much of this sort of rejection of that, and I don't want to constantly dwell on this, but this sort of the parents' generation that fought the Great War, and that's a figure here, and he's kind of dismissed and killed rather readily, and there's metaphors, and they turn shooting the planes into a video game, and some of those kind of things in the arcade. Knowing history and talking about history that we often do in these shows, I don't think we should be so quick to dismiss the nobleness of World War II. And it seems to be there's this rejection here, like, oh, that parents' generation with their wars. It's like, well, I'm glad they fought that one, and I'm glad they fought World War I. And I think that, there is the general truth. Yes, of course, war is terrible, and it's, people are killed, but the Civil War was worth fighting to preserve the Union. The American Revolution was worth fighting to try to start a new country and not put up with the tyranny of King George and colonization through other parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find it a little bit easy for, the teen world in sort of represented in these kind of stories. And I was part of that. I mean, I was coming up in the 60s and 70s as well, to wholeheartedly reject sort of the establishment and the parents' generation, when I don't think that's quite fair.
Well, you also,
Go ahead, Ian.
I'm sorry, but Jeff, you mentioned, and this is, I think, something that The Wall also glossed over, although that was 7 years after this movie, so it's a bit more understandable. But Tommy came out the year that the Vietnam War ended, which means it was in production while the Vietnam War is still going on, and there was still probably a question of how much longer are we going to be there forever?
Yeah, right.
But they don't even, I don't even think thematically really address it. They're stuck in World War II and how awful that is, but it's almost got this Vietnam era sensibility towards World War II, which is completely misplaced, because Vietnam was a complete disaster and a quagmire that did not need to be fought, versus the advancement of Nazism.
And if you're going to make a metaphor for Vietnam, you can go back to MASH. I mean, MASH was about Korea, but it's really about Vietnam in so many regards. But, I think World War II is a very different sort of subject, as you just said, and Nazism and everything else there, especially with the breadth of how that was consuming everybody. But it's funny, and even sort of the mocking of the music hall sort of style and stuff like that, which is so funny too, because you think about the most popular rock band probably in the history of the planet is the Beatles, which were also very big, and I think they just broke up in '70, the year before the concept album came out from the Who. But the Beatles incorporated a lot of the music hall, and Paul McCartney's dad was a musician, and they incorporated a lot of classical music and jazz and R&B, and they loved all that. I mean, the great story is, of course, when they were playing as the bar band in Germany for that year, they learned to play all kinds of music because they had all kinds of audience who requested different songs, and so they learned to not only appreciate the music that they grew up with as kids and with musical parents and stuff like that, but also other musical worlds around them. And so it's a little bit of misread, even I think, of teenagers. I mean, if you look back at some of the songs in the 70s and 60s and even the 50s, there's threads of great classical music stuff, and it wasn't that different from a lot of the stuff that was being written by Rodgers and Hart and those kinds of people back in the days. And jazz is certainly not some sort of like archaic thing, and that's been around since the 20s. So there's some of the pot shots here, I think, feel a little too easy. Maybe that comes with history, but in hindsight, it seems a little bit, dare I say, immature.
Well, and I think especially in contrast with you mentioned the Beatles, one of the great films of all time, regardless of genre, is A Hard Day's Night.
Yes,
Richard
I love
Lester
that
from
movie.
1964, and that dealt with celebrity in pretty much the same kind of way, but it was from the point of view of the Beatles, like just bewilderment. You had all these screaming fans who were treating them almost as gods, and they're just like, we're just
And they could be
regular
violent.
guys, and
They could be torn
we're
apart.
trying to escape them. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Funny, funny you guys talk about Beatles. Colonel Clegg, we'll pull over for a minute. Colonel Clegg said when this album was released, the Beatles, Stones, Hendrix, and Zeppelin were popular, so it took a lot to get noticed, which I can understand, why.
Yeah, rock music was the thing back then. I mean,
And he also makes the comment of so many movies were made just for teens to be alone at a drive-in. I could see this going. We're going to go to the drive-in to listen to the new Who album, and so they listened to that and not actually pay attention to the visuals. It's funny you guys mentioned with World War II and Vietnam, because with Pink Floyd The Wall, it was different. Pink Floyd The Wall, we had the main character actually revere his dad. He even though he didn't meet him, he held it in a slightly different mindset than Tommy, than we see in Tommy here, and how it's treated. And I think Ian hit on it. There was a miscorrelation, probably just because you're dealing with soldiers and war, with Vietnam and World War II. A separation, and they kind of glom them together because it both involves military, it both involves wars, and it both involves soldiers dying in that. But World War II definitely different than Vietnam. But I think it feels like, and some of the other things we've watched during this, the early to mid 70s, seem to kind of glom. Oh, it's military, even though it's World War II. Oh, that's military, so that's bad. But it's like, well, that was different than Tom, but it's glommed together because familiarity. Both are soldiers, both are, war. And I think that's what is happening and why you see what you do, especially in Tommy.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a missed opportunity. I mean, not that the movies are about these things, but it's their choice to include that iconography.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to mention this, why not find some way to comment on, yes, the military was 30 years ago highly revered and very important in terms of protecting the world from absolute evil, to today, 30 years later, in contemporary to the making of these films, we don't think about them anymore. What happened? Why the decline? Why the mistrust? What's with the scandals and the unnecessary wars? And we're just on a war footing now because we created this sort of military industrial complex that needs to be fed. Yeah. Instead of just, to your point, Mark, all military is bad. It's not. It's the motivations and the machinery that keeps it going that needs to be questioned. Again, I think it'd be great to have, and there have been movies that cover this, but what does that mean in terms of, art really trying to deal with that question? Those movies aren't really about those things. They're just sort of used as set dressing. But because they're not about those things, using them as set dressing and trying to mash them all together into one anti-message, it just doesn't hold up.
It's funny, too, because if you look at most of British, at least in the 20th century and starting maybe even into the 21st century, one of the themes that I think you can probably trace from this movie to Sleuth to The Queen to Fawlty Towers, if you will, is the sense of sort of suppression. Mm-hmm. The stiff upper lip, like we must always dignity, right?
Oh yeah, be calm and soldier on. Yeah,
exactly. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Which you've now seen 1,000 memes that parody of that. And in some respects, you didn't really need the military negativity, because the father's he's a war hero, and he comes back and he's scarred, but he's still alive. And they just didn't get the news that he was, and we don't know exactly how he came back. But the real story here, as far as Tommy's problems, are suppression. Okay, mm-hmm. We killed the dad, but you didn't see it and you didn't hear it, and we're going to continue this affair like nothing happened. I mean, that's playing kind of right along with, not only the British world, but to some degree where the age old thinking of well, you do it because I'm your dad and I said so. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that there isn't a time and place for that, but that's sort of a typical crutch of parenting. And you think about the 60s and 70s, and suddenly we were learning more about psychology and mental retardation or bipolar disease or depression and suicide. I mean, I had this discussion on a show the other day with Mike Crowley where we were talking about movies, and he said, we got into the Oscar talk for a second. And he said, how did that ordinary movie beat Raging Bull? And I said, well, now wait a minute. Matt Fagerholm and I are both fans of Ordinary People here. And I said at the time, that was considered to be a very, sort of breakthrough film. There weren't a lot of films about families dysfunction and suicide and how you deal with the fallout of a child who died from an accident. And it was really all about that from all the different viewpoints and experiences of the family members who survived. That was kind of revelatory then. And this is kind of part of that too, where we're starting to realize that there were issues with family and there were issues with sometimes parenting and step parenting and all these kind of things, mixed parenting, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of enough of a theme to screw up Tommy here without having to get into, bashing religion, bashing the previous generation, bashing the war of the World War II. It seems like a pile on.
Or, I mean, and sorry, Mark, just real quick, but I want to respond to that, Jeff. Or work those themes into a story that actually has something to say. Because what you just mentioned, you can't really talk about those issues without getting into the greater societal forces that caused people to repress those impulses.
Repress or suppress.
Religion,
Exactly right.
Not necessarily military, but kind of because of the discipline that it takes to do that.
And right or wrong, that attitude, things like that.
Right. There's a lot of rich material there to say, okay, how did what caused the cover up of the murder and also the parents' instinct, the very non-parental instinct to kind of put this all on the kid and say, oh, it's not that we did something wrong. It's that you didn't see anything and, your dad still died in the war. That messed him up. And that's why I said I found him to be a really tragic figure by the end of the movie, but the movie just doesn't know how to deal with that. So there's really, remake Tommy. That's what I'm saying. Hashtag remake Tommy.
And again, I overall, I didn't really care for the film, but there are scenes and sections that I really enjoyed that I wish we had a little bit more connective tissue. I personally liked the sequence, and I thought they get their point across the best when we're first introduced to adult Tommy, and mom is trying to get him healed at the Temple of Marilyn Monroe. That whole sequence there, though, I get exactly what they're trying to say about celebrityism and it's really well done. It's really well. The video even tells a story. The music, as it goes along, you're seeing a story and you're seeing how it doesn't help Tommy. And in fact, Tommy breaks the huge Marilyn Monroe statue trying to get healed. So, it's showing that that's not for him. So I liked that sequence. The sequence, which was supposed to initially be David Bowie, which would have been completely different, that we get instead Tina Turner as the Acid Queen. Can you imagine David Bowie as the Acid Queen? That would have a different energy to it. I love that sequence, and I didn't realize all the celebrities that were in this film because, again, I didn't know much about it outside of some of the music and that it was talked about a lot. I liked her sequence too. I got what they were going for with that sequence as well, and I think those two sequences and the other sequence that I enjoyed the most was, not enjoyed, but I thought was really handled interestingly was the montage of the parents wanting to go out and putting Tommy with various caretakers who were family members who were severely broken. They put it with either the sadomasochist cousin or which I thought they handled it very well. And apparently it's only in one of the cuts of the movie where we get pervy uncle where it's implied what he
Well, he's implied that he's a pedophile, and then they cut to him having a homosexual magazine out there, which was a terrible line to connect. I think that's
It
been cut out
was.
from stuff, but it was 75, and people were still rather
Right.
dark about some of that. But I want to build on that a second, Mark, because I know we've been very methodical and I think logical about sort of doing the sort of the surgery here on with the scalpel on the problems of the film. There's a lot to enjoy here, at least I think. I know you found a lot of it hellish, Ian, but for me, just going back to, it's like I'd forgotten how well Ken Russell did do on editing a lot of these musical numbers. And you said, if they just done them as like 10 musical numbers. I mean, that Pinball Wizard stuff, the shot of him standing tall on those stilts, and he's in the center, and even like his control panel on the pinball is the little piano, so it's very Elton John-ish. I love that, and I mean, and the buildup of that, and then you've got the who is actually playing the accompaniment, that, and I mean, just some of the editing and the way it's done, it is very much like a music video, and even beyond what musicals did. I mean, musicals did a great job, obviously, of cutting musical numbers and putting together, but the amount of cuts and looking at camera and playing to that, which was very much, sort of modern feeling, even though it was kind of playing off of some of the tropes of old Hollywood. Some of that was really well done. And I mean, even when she's writhing around in the beans, which was disgusting. I mean, God love Anne Margaret for giving it her all. She was giving it her all in scene after scene, the heart attack and this and, rolling around the balls and everything. I mean, she was like committed. So, some very good stuff. And I applaud Ken Russell for being so crazy and stuff about it, but I think a little more measured approach, some quiet in between those. By the way, one little crazy little coincidence: Robert Powell, who played Captain Walker, the dad in it, a few years later played Jesus Christ in a very well received miniseries on NBC television called Jesus of Nazareth at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting sort of pseudo connection, if you will, that the father figure became sort of the son of the father in the in that miniseries. And I still think that might be the best version of sort of the story of Jesus, which is, I think, a tricky one to tell in film. But that was a very well done, that miniseries. I don't know if it's available anywhere on Amazon or something like that, but I remember being very impressed by that. And I've seen them all. I've seen, a lot of them, because I grew up in the Midwest, very religious kid, and that one was done very well. But it was interesting to see. I forgot that Robert Powell was the dad in this.
Yeah, and that's I watched that movie. I think it was earlier this year for the Easter show.
Oh,
is it this year or last year? Time is this particularly this year. Time is kind of fuzzy, but I hadn't put it together until you just mentioned it, that was the actor who played the dad. Now I can totally see it, because while I was watching, I was like, I've seen that guy before somewhere very recently. But yeah, that's why I said at the beginning, this is a film that I appreciate more than I like.
yeah.
And I think part of the problem is just the bias of having been a product of the pop culture that has happened in the last half century since this movie came out, because I've seen a lot of this stuff before, and I've also seen it done by people who learned the lessons from Tommy, which is it doesn't have to be at an 11 all the time. You can punctuate rather than have it be all caps from beginning to end.
Yeah, nicely said.
But I can imagine, and Jeff, maybe you can speak to this, and I think you have been this evening, but seeing this in 1975 as sort of the target demographic, kind of being blown away by a lot of these editing techniques and filming and a lot of the wild props and sets and out there sequences, like with the beans and the suds and all that stuff, it being new then. And saying like, holy shit, I don't need drugs for this. And my mind is being expanded just by what's happening in cinema. Yeah.
And I mean, and the only metaphor that I think you guys can relate to is when MTV came out, and suddenly, these songs that we heard on the radio and took on a whole new meaning by seeing, oh my God, that's the story they're telling with them. I mean, even sometimes mediocre songs, which you might have just been dismissive of, suddenly took on this classic status because of the fantastic story they told with it. I mean, I'll give you one example. Maybe the greatest music video of all time, or certainly in the top 10, is a-ha's Take On Me. I mean, that's kind of a hard to even hear what the hell they're singing lyric kind of song. But man, when that came out, and I mean, and I was still young enough to appreciate that, but that's kind of what it was when I was in junior high and saw this, or the seventh grade, I think it was. That it was like, wow. I mean, it was just, I mean, the noise, the music, the and I was familiar with the album, so I knew some of it was what was coming. But then to see it visualized, and I mean, it's really these. We call them set pieces a lot of times, but we usually apply them to action sequences or maybe killing sequences in horror movies and stuff like this. But the set pieces here are terrific, and even the way he builds the, with the, with the pinball wizard, and then they introduce it's Elton John, who couldn't have been a bigger star in the time this movie was released, and they got him for this. And he still performs it in concert every time he's played it for the last 50 years. I love that. It was I think it was the #1 hit in the States as well. But it was kind of mind blowing. And the only thing I can say is sort of, I was a little bit more ready for it. But I think your generation, or whatever the generation before yours, seeing music videos was sort of a similar thing. Like, wow, does that sort of add a dimension to all this? And suddenly, people who weren't aware of film techniques and cutting and what jump cuts or smash cuts or, these kind of things were just, I mean, look at the way even every Halloween now, everybody does the, and we all know, oh, that's Thriller, and it's
Right.
that kind of impact. And some of these things, they still stick with us 20 years later. And some of this stuff is like, wow, that is almost the template for music videos, with certain songs just sort of being their own set piece like that.
Well, I mean, and I get it. And I know while we're not speaking so highly of Tommy, I think, especially Ian and I, Ian said it, at least for me, I have a very much appreciation for this film. I enjoyed it. I think, it also comes from a time when people don't realize your stars weren't as accessible to everyone.
That's true.
This hit #1 in the box office in the US when it came out in March of 75. This is kind of the equivalent of, and we're seeing it more now thanks to Swiftie and her Eras Tour movie taking off. But we've had a few other concert movies before, but hers really taking off. And look at how many suddenly came out afterwards that were hitting the theaters. This is kind of like that for Who fans. I could see, on one hand, yes, I would have liked it to be a better movie. On the other hand, I completely understand it, not only from a concept and wanting to do it, but also you've already got a built-in fan base. It's what we kind of talk about today with influencers and having movies, and people and actors who build up, or up and coming actors who build up their fan base on social media before they even have gotten in front of a camera, before they do. And they get hired because of their followers, because they have a ready audience. This one I could see being produced at least by a studio, because they're like, wait, the Who wants to make a movie? Look at how many albums they sold. We'll put them on here, and you get to see your people. It's just like music videos. You get to see your favorite band members on screen, which you're usually just hearing them, not everybody, or a picture, but you don't actually get to see them in action.
Yeah, they maybe would get 3 minutes on the Ed Sullivan Show or some of those kind of shows. Tom Jones and John Denver had some of those musical acts, but that was probably it for a lot of people, unless you were lucky enough to be able to get to see him in concert, which wasn't quite as a sort of thing as it was today.
Well, especially in the States. I mean, and also a movie ticket is cheaper than a concert ticket. Yeah. We also didn't have these ridiculous windows because home video was not a concept back in 1975.
That's
so
right.
It's like you go see the Who movie in the theater, or you don't see it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And this is before cable became a thing. But even when cable first came out, when HBO was basically making their whole, not on showing old movies, the quickest you'd see a current release on cable was at least a year.
Yeah, it was a year. It was
a year, and it was like, that's where it was. So you had to see it in the theater, which was the great thing about growing up in movies like this. Like, you have to go see it now because we've talked about how many times on both of your shows. Like, well, you could just wait 3 months if you. In fact, Companion did very well on VOD because I think people heard probably good things about it, but they didn't get a chance to see it. It was in the theaters in January.
Yeah, now it's 2-3 week windows before it's on a major streaming service, or you can rent it for less than the cost of two people going out to the cinema.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. And also in that rental, which is like 24 hours, whatever, you can watch it as many times as you want. So
right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get the popularity too of this film, and I see the influences and what would come after it. So I very much appreciate Tommy for what it is. I was expecting maybe something a little bit more, considering the hype and the talk that has been around this movie for so long. But I'm glad I watched it. I'm not sure if it would be a repeat watch for me, but I appreciate what they were doing, especially for this time period. And yeah, it's because of this that you got people probably doing your music videos in that now, that in the 80s that would soon come up, going, hey, we got Pink Floyd. You look at Pink Floyd The Wall, you look at Tommy, you look at a few of the other band made stuff, and you're like, yeah, I can totally see those influences, especially the way it's cut in that. And Tommy is definitely MTV video approach to your music videos. And so yeah, so I appreciate it quite a bit. Ian, your final thought with Tommy.
I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up. I mean, I might watch this again at some point. It's going to have to be a while. I think now that I know, I've seen it, I know what to expect. Maybe I can be a bit more engaged next time and not just be praying for it to end with every passing minute, because it's really frustrating. Because again, I appreciated a lot of the performances, a lot of the visuals. I just don't think it came together in terms of a story, because it just seemed to go on and on and on and on until it was just over. Aside from the Jack Nicholson sequence and anything involving Oliver Reed, I really didn't have much use for this as a movie narrative experience.
Well put. Jeff, your final thought with it.
Well, I look at it a little bit better than that, because I'm looking at it through the lens of that 14-year-old. But I think it's worth, if somebody is interested in how, sort of movies and sort of pop culture and teenage pop culture particularly is married to certain periods of time. It's a curiosity and historical piece, I think, for that. Yeah. It's got a lot of clever things going on. I think you can appreciate the music and the celebrity, and Anne Margaret got a Best Actress nomination that year for this film, which is kind of hard to believe, but she did.
It's all about the suds, man.
Yeah, the suds. She gave it her all. They said, not a lot of A-listers are willing to roll around in cans of beans, but she was. Apparently, her husband Roger Smith was like, "How long does she have to do this scene for?" And it was like she was doing it all day. It's like Ken's like, "Bring on the beans." Can you imagine the smell of that set after that day?
Ooh.
But anyway, so I would recommend it to people more as maybe a historical or curiosity piece. But it is interesting, and I think it's eminently interesting. But I think all the things we've talked about tonight show that it wasn't a great movie, but it's an interesting one, and certainly with all the context we talked about.
And I want to jump in here, Jeff. I think what you said is important, because there is a reason to watch this movie. If you just want to study movies and musicals and like production design, there's many reasons to watch this movie outside of just, I want to watch a film with a story that kind of makes sense. So yeah, with that, I would give that a high recommendation, strictly on like a technical, experiential level. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's well put. It's similar to how we felt about Pink Floyd The Wall, actually. So yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here. Oh, we got Colonel Clegg making one final comment. He said, he said Princess Purple Rain was both terrible and haunting. I remember
not as bad as Under the Cherry Moon, Colonel.
Yeah, see, I remember seeing Purple Rain, one particular scene, but that's because I was about maybe 9 when it came out, and there's one particular scene I remember. But anyway, I was way too young to watch Purple Rain. But now I'm thinking of that scene. I apologize. But next week, we are watching another musical with music from one particular band, but it's not a movie by the band. It is just featuring their music with Across the Universe, featuring a group we mentioned tonight, the Beatles. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I hope you folks tune in. And now, as always, this is where I give my wonderful crew their license to shill, so you can see all their wonderful work. Jeff, you are first, sir. Please, the floor is yours.
You can read the place where I do my movie and film show reviews, theestablishingshot.org. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff York Chicago. I'm also No, I'm Jeff York Writer there. Sorry. I don't have the same consistent title everywhere. I'm Jeff York Chicago and Jeff York Characters on Instagram. Little clue to, if you read my reviews, I tend to draw a caricature to illustrate a movie or show that particularly speaks to me. So it's a combination of both words and pictures, sort of as a reaction back at something that I have been tasked with reviewing. So those are the places you can find me, and you can write me at both places. And if you don't like what I said here, let me know, and we can have a DM conversation about it. I've had far worse things slip into my DM. So, although I did have the writer from Blue Moon purchase my caricature of Ethan Hawke and Margaret Qualley from that movie last week. So that was lovely.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
He approached me in my DM, which is a great thing about Instagram, and so that was very nice to hear from him. He liked enough to purchase it. So, and yeah, I do, like I said, the characters. And if your audience ever wants one for the holidays or for a birthday or favorite celebrity or something like that, I do commissions, and sometimes I give them to people I like for just as gifts. So, I don't know if that'll be any of your viewers, but it might be you, Mark. It has been Ian numerous times. I got to meet you in person sometime, though, Mark.
I know we're
working up to Stevens Point, and I'll bring a drawing of you or something.
We're oh my God! Just a line with a ball head. That's all you have to do. Ian, I know you got something to shill. Go ahead, sir.
First, I want to just mention about next week. It's because I love you, Mark, that I'm going to be on the show, because Across the Universe is a film that I watched, and it was kind of like the Ludovico technique from A Clockwork Orange. I vowed never to watch it again, and I feel like I barely survived.
Wow.
I'm going to watch it again.
That is
I appreciate that.
By the way, I'm not here next weekend, so I couldn't if I wanted to, but I'm not sure I would have wanted to necessarily talk about that movie either, Mark. Sorry. Well, are you ever going to talk about All That Jazz? Have you ever talked about that one?
Not yet, no.
Can I give you a quick topic, just as I thought I was going to say this afterwards? I'm going to say it in front of your fans. So,
okay.
So the Colonel can say, I'd buy that for $1. But it would be interesting to have a discussion. Maybe it's a 2 or 3 parter, even like good movie musicals versus bad movie musicals. Because I think they're one of the trickiest things to do, especially as we get farther and farther away from them becoming sort of Hollywood stock and trade. That would, where they go wrong and how they go wrong. I think it's a very tricky task.
It is a tricky genre, and that would be interesting. I'll have to think about that, because
it's funny because in the world of MTV, you'd think people would be used to people breaking into song, but I think the finessing of that, for whatever reason or how it's done, still has to be very, very much a consideration. I think a thing like Wicked works because it's a fantasy. I think a thing like Across the Universe, where you're trying to tell it in sort of a real world, not as much.
Well, there are multifacets to that argument, and as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of like 2 theories right off the top of my head. So, Mark, at some point, maybe after Animation Nation next year, there you go.
I love that.
Part 1
is on Kicking the Seat. Part 2 is on. It's like a CBS crossover with
CBS crossover. Oh, one of those
or something.
Like one of those 911 crossovers. Yeah, there you go. Well, no, I've got the 20th anniversary coming up next year of being on YouTube for 20 years. Yes, I'm that old, folks. And so maybe we'll work out a crossover there. But Ian, what website?
Okay. So yes, I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I'm also right here on YouTube at Kicking the Seat. And this week, we've got 2 live streams. On Tuesday night, that's the 11th, we're going to be talking about Predator Badlands. And then on Thursday night, which would be the 13th, we're going to be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. So come check that out and hang out, share your comments and all that good stuff. I'm also here just about every Sunday talking about movies with Mark, the exception being next week when we discuss Across the Universe. Sorry.
he's just gonna come on, give his piece, and then sit there.
Usually we talk about films. We're not
even drink his coffee. He's just gonna sip his coffee.
That's fantastic. Ian, that reminds me of I have to tell you, I've told a couple people. Well, I'm sorry, Mark, you're trying to end your show.
No, that's fine.
I've told a couple people of your reaction to Fire and Ash Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
The Avatar movie?
Yeah.
And we had to watch the preview 30 times in the theater, and the PR people were asking for some immediate comments on it. It was one of the funniest things. I won't share it here because I don't want to have to share it in case it's a problem, but it was very funny, and I've laughed about it many times and told a number of people that, because I said it's too good to just save. They deserve to laugh too. It was a very funny comment.
Well, thank you.
well, way to keep us on pins and needles.
How about
Jeff.
that? Yeah, you have to have me
Appreciate
back
that.
now. Like,
Yeah, you gotta have you back now. SpecialMarkProductions.com for all your movie man needs. We're going to have an interview with some folks behind a short film that I review. The review drops tomorrow. Looking forward to talking to them. We got some interviews up already last week from 2 individuals who were involved in a interesting, dramatic romance thriller called Yesterday Is Almost Here. We got to talk to Justin Tini and Philip Batello. And Philip was in All Jacked Up and Full of Worms, so it was really cool to talk to him. And so we got that stuff up there, all kinds of other stuff, specialmarkproductions.com or here on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, vote, some bells and whistles and all that. We're almost at 8,000 subscribers, folks. It's been a big year for us, and hopefully we just keep getting bigger. Like I said, next year is the 20th anniversary, and next week we go across the universe with the Beatles songs. I've not seen this film. I've heard things about it, but we can't always talk about the really great movies on a podcast. There's other places for you to find that, but here you will always, I think, find an interesting pick, if nothing else. So thank you so much. And one final thought, though, with Purple Rain being both terrible and haunting, Colonel Clegg, the movie may be, but that album, as the kids would say, is a banger. And I love my vinyl.
Does it
and
rip?
I even play it.
Does it rip, Mark?
Huh?
Does it rip?
It rips. It totally rips. It's a masterpiece. Actually, I've been having it on vinyl. I've been able to play the 2 tracks or 3 tracks where he's talking backwards, so you can hear him swearing. It's wonderful. So we'll talk to you later, folks. Thank you so much. Until next time, we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.